Hello everyone and welcome to another Commander Tactics Deck Tech. My name's Pope, and in today's Deck Tech we will be building around the Abzan Mutate legend that is Nethroi Apex of Death. For the sake of convenience, I am going to be referring to this commander as Roy for the remainder of the video. Roy is a 5/5 cat nightmare beast costing 2 generic, white, black, green. Roy can be mutated out for 4 generic, a Selesnya, and 2 black, has Death Touch and Lifelink. Whenever Roy mutates, you can return any number of creatures with total power 10 or less from our yard to the battlefield. This ability sets the stage for a very efficient combo deck, assuming we can fill up our yard as quickly as we can by the time we can cast our commander. Our tactics for this deck will be very focused on 2 simple measures. Step 1, we're going to be loading our graveyard up with all of the combo pieces that we need. We're going to be using spells and effects that will most effectively get as many cards as possible into our bin before the turn in which we are able to mutate out Nethroi. And step 2 of our plan is to mutate Roy, reanimate all of our creatures, and combo off for a quick win. The deck has multiple lines of play that enable us to reach our win cons in several different sequences. A quick disclaimer and note about this deck's playstyle and budget. This deck isn't going to spin its wheels or durdle and is very focused on reaching our win condition as quickly as possible. Usually I discuss power level at the end of a deck, but with this deck, it is built as a very solid 8. This deck is 100% built to compete and win. We didn't put a budget on this deck when we built it, but we did try to keep each spell in the quote-unquote reasonable price range. The land base of this deck actually comes in at almost half of the price of the entire deck, and that's simply because an efficient land base leads to a more efficient gameplay. But now let's get the show started by taking a look at the spells and effects that we're going to be utilizing to load up our graveyard, kicking things off with 3 extremely powerful creature spells in Hermit Druid, Stinkweed Imp, and Stitcher Supplier. Hermit Druid is definitely one of our most powerful creatures, going to be able to unload a ton of our deck into our graveyard. For only 1 and a green, we get this 1/1 Druid creature that says for a green we can tap it, reveal cards from the top of our library until we reveal a basic land card. Then we put that card into our hand and all other cards revealed into our graveyard. With this deck, we are only running 6 basics, so there's a higher than likely chance we'll be dumping 10 to 20 cards at a time with Hermit Druid's activation. Stinkweed Imp, 2 and a black, is a 1/2 with flying. It says whenever it deals damage to another creature, it destroys that creature, so kind of old school Death Touch, but the power of this creature comes in its Dredge 5. If this is in our graveyard, instead of drawing a card, we then can mill 5 and put Stinkweed Imp back into our hand. And Stitcher Supplier, a single black whenever it enters the battlefield or dies, so 2 times, we're going to get to mill 3 from our graveyard. All of these creatures can come down early or be used from the graveyard, and of course can be brought back with Nethroi's ability. Next up, we have 2 extremely helpful artifacts in Altar of Dementia and Mesmeric Orb. Altar of Dementia, for only 2 mana, says sacrifice a creature. Target player then puts the number of cards equal to that creature's power from the top of their library into their graveyard. We definitely want to use this on ourselves mostly because we want to be able to get all those combo pieces from our graveyard back into play. And then Mesmeric Orb, another 2-cost artifact, says whenever any permanent becomes untapped, that permanent's controller puts the top card of his or her library into their graveyard. By turn 3 or 4, ideally we're going to have 4 or 5 lands, so every untap we're going to be milling that amount of cards plus every other permanent that untaps with those lands. Mesmeric Orb can be extremely powerful depending on what we get in play early. And then we have a couple other spells to ensure we have the correct combo pieces in our graveyard with Buried Alive and Entomb. Buried Alive is a sorcery for 2 and a black that says search your library for up to 3 creature cards, put them into your graveyard, and then shuffle your library. If we can cast Buried Alive on turn 3 and mutate Nethroi out by turn 5, there's a good chance we are just going to be winning on the spot. And then we have Entomb for only 1 black, and at instant speed, we are able to search our library for a single card and put it directly into our graveyard. This is great in case we need to tutor something up at the very last moment when we mutate Nethroi out and have that combo piece readily available. And then lastly, we do have a small reanimator package with this deck just in case Nethroi gets too expensive or we want to bring out any of those bombs Animate Dead, Reanimate, and Stitch together are going to make that happen. Animate Dead says for 1 and a black, we get to enchant a creature in our graveyard, bring it back to the battlefield, and it has -1, -0. It's a wall of text, but that's essentially what it says. Reanimate, for only 1 black, we get to put a target creature card from any graveyard onto the battlefield under our control and lose life equal to its CMC. If our opponents have a great creature in their graveyard, we can pull it straight out and take a little bit of damage. And then Stitch together for only 2 and a black, one of the most underrated reanimator spells in my opinion. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand, but if there are 7 or more cards in your graveyard, you get to bring it back from the graveyard straight to the battlefield. For only 1 additional black, Stitch together is an extremely great card. But now that we've got our graveyards full, we've got every piece we need in there, we need to be able to combo off. So let's take a look at the different lines of play we're going to be running. Starting things off with one of my favorite combos that I've actually talked about before, and that is the Revelark Karmic Guide Blood Artist loop. I've actually talked about this loop before when discussing the Teysa Karlov deck tech, so let's take a look now at exactly how this combo works and how it will secure us a win. The pieces needed for this combo are any sack outlet, any death trigger creature that drains on death, either in the graveyard or on the battlefield, and Revelark and Karmic Guide. The loop we'll be creating produces infinite ETB effects and infinite death triggers, which means infinite draining via the creature of our choice. Also, depending on the sack outlet of our choice, we actually don't even need the drain creature. For this example, we're going to start with Zulaport and Karmic Guide in our graveyard and Altar of Dementia on the board. We'll start by casting Revelark. We then sack the Revelark to the altar, which lets us return Zulaport and Karmic Guide from our graveyard to the battlefield since their power is equal to 2 or less. When Karmic Guide enters, it's going to allow us to return Revelark to the battlefield. We are now in the state where we started. We can then sack Karmic Guide and Zulaport to the altar, getting the drain life triggers off of Zulaport and mill triggers off of our Altar of Dementia, and then we can sack Revelark to repeat the process until all of our opponents have been drained out and we win the game. And then our next combo is an oldie but a goodie, and that is the Mike and Trike 2-creature combo. Mikaeus the Unhallowed for 3 and triple black has Intimidate. Whenever a human deals damage to you, we get to destroy it, but the most important part is that other non-human creatures you control have +1/+1, and they have Undying, which means if they would die and they didn't have a +1 counter on them, they come back from the graveyard to the battlefield with a +1 counter on them. And then Triskelion for 6 mana says whenever it enters the battlefield, it has 3 +1 counters on it. Then we can remove a +1 counter from Triskelion to deal 1 damage to any target creature or player. The loop would look something like this. With Triskelion in play, he is a 2/2 with 3 +1 counters on him. We would remove 1 counter to deal 1 damage to our opponent's face. Then we would remove the other 2 counters to ping Triskelion himself to kill it. When Triskelion dies, he's going to come back with 4 +1 counters. We can then remove 2 of those counters, deal 2 damage to an opponent, then remove the other 2 to kill Triskelion again. This loop can be repeated infinitely until we have pinged down all of our opponents and win the game. And then the last cheeky little combo I did want to mention with this deck isn't going to win us the game on the spot, but it is going to allow us to generate infinite mana, and that is Nyxbloom Ancient with Basalt Monolith. Nyxbloom Ancient is going to enable us to do insane things already, but with Basalt Monolith in play, we will then be able to generate infinite colorless mana. This is an extremely simple combo, but again, will enable us to get Nethroi out when we need to and just win the game. And then lastly, 3 other spells I did want to mention about when talking about our combos: Silence, Eerie Ultimatum, and Living Death. Silence is a spell for only 1 white that says your opponents cannot cast spells this turn. If you're playing against the blue players or players that have lots of removal, we definitely want to cast Silence at the beginning of the turn in which we are going to attempt to win. This doesn't disable activated abilities or effects, but it absolutely will get us around those counter spells or pesky removal coming down. And then Eerie Ultimatum for double white, triple black, double green coming out of Ikoria says return any number of permanent cards with different names from your graveyard to the battlefield. If Nethroi has gotten too expensive, there's a good chance Eerie Ultimatum can just win us the game by itself, returning all of our combo pieces, including our artifacts and enchantments and lands back to play. This card can absolutely be a one spell game winner. And then Living Death, extremely similar effect, but it's just going to bring back all of our creature cards from our graveyard to the battlefield, essentially swapping our board state and our graveyard of creatures. And then with those creatures in play, there's a good chance, again, we'll be able just to win off of a big combo. It's important that if Nethroi doesn't pan out, we have alternate ways to win, and each of these spells are going to help us get that done. But at the end of the day, this deck is all about comboing off using Nethroi's Mutate ability. We need to ensure that whenever it is time to cast him, we have the mana ready to go and the creatures in our graveyard. As I said at the beginning of the video, there are multiple lines of play with Nethroi. So whenever you mutate him out, just look through your graveyard, get all your 0 attack creatures first, and then proceed to find the combo pieces you need to drain your opponents out and win the game. It's also important to note that if your graveyard isn't large enough, don't waste the time casting Nethroi. We want to make sure we have everything in place to win the game and don't want his CMC to rack up. But now that we've seen everything inside our graveyard loader and our combo pieces, let's take a look at what else we got inside the 99. Starting things off with our removal and control, we have about 8 spells and effects going to help us destroy our opponent's creatures and permanents. Our card draw and advantage in this deck, I put it 9+ because we do load up our graveyard a ton, which is a form of card advantage with Nethroi. Our ramp in this deck is very important because Nethroi's Mutate ability isn't exactly cheap, so we do have 12 ramp spells, and again, the power level of this deck comes in at a very solid 8. There are ways you could improve it, and I'll go over those in just a second, but this deck is definitely packed with some heat and is ready to get some wins. Winning with this deck primarily is going to be focused around Nethroi. Once we cast him, we want to win the game on the spot. If we don't get it done with Nethroi's ability though, we do have multiple aristocrat drain effects such as Blood Artist to help us drain our opponent's life down. And if that still hasn't got the job done, Eerie Ultimatum, Living Death are going to help us bring all those creatures back from our graveyard and get the win that way. A few budget alternatives for this deck: Golgari Grave Troll, Mausoleum Secrets, and Final Parting. Golgari Grave Troll, Great Dredge 6, gonna help us fill our graveyard up even quicker. Mausoleum Secrets, a tutor, is going to let us go into our deck and get any black card lower than the amount of creature cards in our graveyard. And Final Parting, a diabolic tutor with an Entomb built in, lets us search for 2 cards. We get to put 1 in our hand and 1 in our graveyard. And then there are many ways we could upgrade this deck, but a few of my favorites are Survival of the Fittest, Academy Rector, and Walking Ballista. Survival of the Fittest says choose and discard a creature card for only 1 green mana. Search your library for a creature card, reveal it, put it into your hand. Just an amazing way to get the right combo pieces into our hand when we need them, but also put creatures into our graveyard. Academy Rector for 3 and a white says whenever Academy Rector is put into our graveyard from play, we can then exile Academy Rector and go get any enchantment from our deck and put it straight onto the battlefield. And then lastly, Walking Ballista, a few different ways that we can get a loop going where Walking Ballista is just going to be able to machine gun down all of our opponents at the same time. But that does wrap up this Abzan deck tech on Nethroi Apex of Death. A real powerhouse among the mutate creatures, and one I'm a huge fan of bringing to the table to go for those really quick wins. Let me know down in the comments below what you thought of this deck tech, and if you want to see all the cards we selected, you can click on the full deck tech link down in the description below. If you're new here, thanks so much for checking out this video. Maybe hit that like button, and if you enjoyed what you saw, maybe consider subscribing. A new video will come your way every Friday, and if you're a returning sub, thanks so much. Let me know what deck tech you would like to see next. I love Ikoria, and I'm a huge fan of the mutate mechanic, but if you want to see something maybe coming from Core 21, let me know. If you're a Twitter user, head on over there, drop us a follow at EDH Tactics. Hey, we do have a Patreon now. If you want to get involved with that, join our Discord. You can head on over to our Patreon at Commander Tactics. But hey, thanks so much for watching, guys. We appreciate you so much. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll be seeing you for the next one.